Hunter and Buzz to journey onward by Master Atlan, Chapter 85. As time moved on, people underestimated how much wheat and farming supplies weighed. When people saw those thin and long stalks waving in the wind, they might expect them to pop off and fly away with a strong gust of air. But in actuality, when they were layered on top of each other and stuffed in a bag, they could be super heavy enough that someone unprepared could throw their own back or seriously hurt themselves. You have to be careful, especially when carrying so many of them at once, which is why Oscar considered himself a bit of an expert when it came to moving all of the supplies as quickly as possible. The young farm boy had one of the large bags up and onto his shoulder as he looked it over to the old woman managing the desk at the store. She laughed as he walked by and dropped the bag on top of the pile he had already walked in. You're doing a good job there, Oscar. Soon you'll be big enough to carry several of those bags on your arms alone. Huh. Well, I sure hope that time comes soon. He jokingly responded as they shared a quick laugh, and he clapped some of the residual dust off of his hands. With a quick lean back and a pop of his spine, Oscar was ready to get back to work. Alright, that was the last one of the bags, and now I just need to carry the other stuff back to our cart. Oh, no worries, dear. I had my grandson already start packing everything else up for you. Oscar blinked and looked back at his family's cart. Just like she said, her grandson had already finished moving the bags of seed, the supplies for the house, and all their new farming equipment into the back while he had finished moving all of the sacks. Her grandson, who couldn't have been a few years older than Oscar, wiped his chin as his much larger, thicker arms bulged out of his shirt. In response, he looked down at his little toothpick limbs and almost felt them sway in the wind. On second thought, he might need to start working with heavier products than just wheat if you wanted to gain a little muscle. If you're interested, I can give you a few pointers on gaining muscle and appropriate caloric intake to improve your health. Oscar, you done? We gotta go. Come in. Bye, ma'am. He waved goodbye to the kind old lady and hurried back to his aunt's call, getting the convenient excuse to once again ignore the strange voice and thoughts in his head. Once again, he just really hoped it was his inside voice, just sounding a little more mature and with a different voice, and sometimes invaded the other inside voice. Sorry. Oscar pulled himself into the car alongside his aunt as she took the wheel of the cart and prepared for them to take off. Before they did, they heard someone call out, Miss Pine, hold up! Another vendor, an older man close to his aunt's age, ran over with a cart of apples in his arms. You two need this too? But we didn't pay for apples. Consider them on the house. He fancied his aunt. Oscar grinned knowingly and nudged her gently with his elbow as she swatted him away. She smiled and graciously nodded at the older man. Thank you, Gray. That's very kind of you. Anytime. But are you sure you two are going to be okay? Gray looked out in the direction they were going to head down and saw the sun had started to fall behind the trees. It'll take some time to get back to your farm in this beat-up old thing. You won't make it back before it gets darker. It's all right. His aunt said reassuringly. We haven't had any grim sightings close to our farm in months. We should be fine on our own. It didn't hurt that they had a shotgun armed and ready under their seats. Well, all right then. If you say so. He stepped back and waved them goodbye as their old cart's engine started up and slowly pushed down the street. Stay safe. Thank you. Oscar waved back and turned back ahead as they left the market. As they headed towards the trees, he snickered to himself. Hey, you think he'll give us some meat next time if we asked him? Oscar, stop that! His aunt reprimanded him, but still chuckled. He was kind enough to give us a cart of apples for free. We shouldn't be taking advantage of that generosity. Well, I don't think he gave those out for the goodness of his heart. Oscar stretched back and grabbed an apple before plopping back in his seat and taking a big bite out of it. I think he was expecting something in return. His aunt looked at him judgmentally as he shrugged with the apple crunching under his teeth. She shook her head but giggled. Well, then he's going to be waiting for a long time. Oscar laughed with his aunt as they traveled down the road with their farm, their home, as their next destination. Hunting. far away from any settlement or civilization, far away from any monument or touch of humanity's influence. There was a dark, abandoned land dyed in a haunted color of red skies, with crystals sprouting out every few feet, and littering the floors of this land were small puddles of black, coalescing liquid that promised suffering and death if it came in direct contact. And it was in this dark, desolate land that a being of unimaginable power, strength, and cruelty once found its home, an entity that no longer resided in this realm, and instead joined its brother in abandoning their creation to never return, which left it open for its new permanent resident to call home. A magnificent, twisted castle of black, purple, and red colors stretched up from the ground, and pierced so high into the crimson sky that nothing could escape its sights. And on the highest tower of this structure, its ruler looked out over her land. Her skin was like white snow with small black veins resting underneath. Not from age, for she no longer was bound by the promise of death, despite her many years, but from untold lifetimes being exposed to the grim in their pools. Her long white hair was pulled up behind her head and tied together in a large bun with 6 bunches of tied together behind her neck. And her whole body was covered in a sleek black cloak that covered her entire form. The ancient being watched from above as several airships sailed through the dark red sky and headed towards the castle. And since no one was foolish enough to approach this abandoned haunted land for no reason, and Osmond's little cabal weren't stupid enough to make a move of retaliation for Beacon, then this must have been their new associates. As she watched them dock on their destined landing pad, she could see from high above that her familiar associate had brought a number of his subordinates along as well for the first time. Even from up here, she could see them looking around in bewilderment and disbelief. For those experiencing this for the first time, it was always a wave of shock and confusion. They had to slowly grow accustomed to the way their perception of the world and how it worked shifted into something unknown and completely unexpected. Well, her voice was soft and easy as she looked aside and watched the flock of Nevermore leap off the balcony and fly through the air. She turned to the door and started her way back to the hall. I can't keep them waiting. Salem, Queen of the Grim, ancient enemy of Osbid and his Ilka, walked through the halls of her Evernight castle as she navigated the vast and complex system of corners that made up her castle. She realized that this was the first time in so many years that she didn't have an attendant by her side. She sorely missed her constant companion's presence, but she had faith that he would complete the task she had entrusted to him. As her focus returned to the matter at hand, Salem approached the extravagant doorway that led to their conference hall, but before she pushed through the doors, she could hear the voices coming through from the other side. No, I think it's very sweet and very considerate. She took you in, and now you're taking in some pets of your own. I'm sure she's very pleased. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Oh, now isn't that sweet? She pushed the doors open in time to hear the sound of boots stomping on the table. As she walked in, all eyes turned to her and Mercury, who had put one foot up on the table as he and Emerald glared at Arthur. Slowly stepped back down. Everyone stood up out of their chairs and turned to her as she walked inside. She walked around the long table and looked around at her followers. Seated in the far corner was Cinderfall, finally returned from her long mission from Mistral to Vale, with the intent of bringing their enemies crumbling down all at once. Beacon was no longer standing. Vale had collapsed from its position as one of the greatest everlasting kingdoms into a smoking husk, which refugees happily abandoned. The maiden was finally theirs, and Osmond had died at her hand. It was a resounding success, but not without its toll. Cinder's great beauty had been marred, a scar tissue covering almost half of her face and robbing her of an eye and an arm. She sat silently to the side, a long red satin dress over her body, so not to agitate her wounds, and her hair cropped short to her neck for the same reason. Emerald and Mercury stepped back and stood stood at her flank as they avoided Salem's gaze. They worked under her, but their allegiance was closer to Cinder than it was to Salem. That was fine as long as her loyal servants stayed loyal and her followers did the same. Salem stopped by the chair at the head of the table and pulled it back. As she sat down, her group took that as a sign to sit down as well. As the trinkets in Salem's hair jangled as she looked to the side. I step out for only a moment, and your malicious intent just seems to seep out. Can you not control yourself when you see the moment arise, Dr. Watts? Apologies, ma'am. The man in the other far corner of the table was Arthur Watts, a tall, lanky gentleman with black hair on top and a gray shade along his temples. He closed his screw on the table and ran his fingers along his mustache before looking over at her. But I'm just so surprised to see her again. Last we saw her, she was making a promise to claim the rest of the maiden's power and bring down Bacon, which she did. Indeed, and that deserves our congratulations. Watts clapped his hands, the gesture coming off as nothing more than condescending and demanding and demeaning when performed by the former Adlesian doctor. The action seemed to have its desired effect as Cinder's gloved hand tensed into a fist. However, even with this success, she comes home missing an eye, an arm, but broken beyond repair, and dragging along with her not only some desperate pups that won't leave her side, but a veritable army of suicidal fools that we have to accommodate now. It baffles the mind that she could somehow win and gain this legendary power she had been pining after, yet still lose and put us in a position to clean up afterwards. Goodness, she's in such dire straits that we had to send one of our own away so not to trigger an episode. It's in this condition in the task I assigned him are unrelated. This was an endeavor I could only send someone I have complete faith and trust in to succeed, and I believe it's something I share with all of you. However, he had the added benefit of being much less. Salem looked around the table at her loyal cabal and nodded. Conspicuous. Watts looked over at the giant hulk of meat by his side. The deranged madman seated at his angle, and the scarred, broken mess of a woman across from him wanted in the remains of Belle. He conceded. Fair enough. I heard from our new cohorts that you were quite the screamer. As Cinder flinched angrily at her friend, Emerald Mercury looking over as well at the man seated next to her. The man in question was the only one, not sitting in his chair like the rest, instead opting to stay perched on the chair like a gargoyle outside its castle, or a predator gazing down on its prey. He had a narrow, sullen face with eyes that were wild and untamed. His chest was exposed to reveal the cross and jagged scars that lined his body. The long braid of hair going over his back swung around as Tyrion Kalos snickered to himself, flailing around, crying uncontrollable, and even with some involuntary discharge. Quite the experience you had on your big mission, wasn't it? Cinder's hand slammed into the table hard enough to shake the whole thing. Her eyes started to flow with an ethereal amber flame as the table started to glow from the heat it absorbed. Tyrion chuckled in thrilled excitement as Watts pulled the scroll off the table before it could melt. As anyone was about to reprimand them all, a giant hand slammed on top of the table as well, stopping and shaking even as he grew hotter. Everyone looked over at the final member around the table as his hand started to sizzle from the heat he was exposed to. The massive man, barely able to fit properly in his seat, and with shoulders so wide they extended past the back of the chair. The giant bearded man was composed and taciturn, unfazed by the damage he was causing himself as he gained the attention of everyone around him. Hazel Reynard silently looked over at Cinder as her eye narrowed. He showed no anger or annoyance at her outburst or behavior, but neither was he intimidated or persuaded by the show of force she gave in her debilitated state. As Cinder stared at him in a long moment of silence, she came to a decision that no outburst at this moment would be worth it. Whether she realized that after taking a moment to focus, or realized that if she couldn't sway Hazel, then it probably wouldn't work against the others. Cinder retracted her hand and seized her heating of the table. The tabletop returned to its normal color as Hazel slowly pulled his hand back, just to fold along his side with his arm. Salem let out a small hum, appreciative that there was someone else at the table to keep things in control when she didn't wish to act as mediator. With the mood settled and matters back in hand, Salem looked towards the door. Our associates have returned with their followers as well. It seems from now on we can expect our castle to be a little more livelier than we're used to. They're not going to touch my things, are they? Watts inquired with a groan. If there's one thing I hate, it's nosy interlopers poking around and mucking things up. Surely they're not going to be sneaking into our rooms and invading our space. That Orochimaru fellow already strikes me as a slimy spy, looking to gain whatever advantage he can. I can give them express directions to do not enter any designated places in the castle, if that would put your mind at ease. Watch graciously nodded his head in thanks before Salem added, and although this should be obvious, please try not to pick any fights with any new arrivals at the castle. She looked over to her left, and please don't toy with or kill them. Well, if my goddess requested it of me, then I can't refuse, and thank you for clarifying before they arrived. Although I say I'll give them limits, it will really be up to them to listen and follow them. They might just be rambunctious and refuse to listen. Salem pondered absent-mindedly before looking over the table. She sat up in her chair and tilted her head. You have more experiences with this group than anyone else here. We've met Orochimaru and his doctor, but what do you think about the rest of them? Cinder blinked a few times before turning to her side. She motioned Emerald to bend down, and her loyal subordinate obliged to lean by her mouth. There's no reason to strain yourself, Cinder. I was actually asking Emerald and Mercury for their opinions. The youngest people in the room looked over at the pale woman in shock. In order to keep Cinder's in order to keep Cinder's anonymity as preserved as possible, you two acted as a proxy with Orochimaru's forces, correct? So then there shouldn't be anyone who could give a better examination of our allies than you two. So please enlighten us to what do you think about them. Emerald and Mercury shared a glance before looking down at Cinder. The mentor and woman that had offered them a place in this cabal had ensured them that they had to do was follow her guidance, and they would find their place. But now their mentor's leader, the terrifying woman that looked like a mixture of a corpse and a monster, was expecting them to answer her question without Cinder's assistance, because she wanted to hear what they thought of Cinder's choice in alliance without any leading from Cinder herself. They looked down at her for any form of advice, but Cinder was staring ahead, not wavering or looking anywhere but forward without focus. The two young newcomers looked hesitantly at each other instead. We've already established a strong allegiance with the White Fang, thanks to her efforts while she was away. Whatever you had to say doesn't threaten any standing or our cooperation. We only want to know your personal opinion about these people. Hazel's low and booming voice betrayed the calming, encouraging words he gave to the two youngsters. Just tell us what you think. They can get the job done. Mercury spoke first. Emerald still hesitant to speak up, but the young assassin having steeled himself after hearing the stallion giant's words. Whatever was asked of them, they did. Guard duty, infiltration, assistance during our plan. They did it all. Even when some of their numbers were lost during jobs with the White Fang, or when they were swarmed during the fall, they would focus on the task we gave them. There was a reason. The reason when Touchwork offered to contact them for assistance, she was pleased to work with them. As long as you don't rat them out or spread their name, they'll get the job done. And considering the people present, he looked around the room. I don't think we need to worry about that. So then you vouch for their capabilities. They'll remain loyal. They're loyal and expendable. Emerald finally spoke up, and her eyes lowered as she wouldn't meet anyone's gaze as she spoke. That's their whole gimmick. If they get killed in the field, then they just move on. If they're captured or there's a threat of them getting caught, they'll take their own lives. And the rest of them don't even act like anything's changed. They can't because their leader has squeezed out any sense of self-preservation or desire or want from all of them. All that's left is loyalty to his desire and making sure nothing gets in his way. It's not even loyalty out of any sense of duty or obligation that they do this stuff. They're just so damn scared of Orochimaru and what he'll do to them if he gets his hands on them. Mercury finished. He whipped and stripped everything away from them. He wiped and stripped everything away from them that wasn't useful to his needs. And now he has a warrior force for his personal use. But we can get used to them. So I guess it works out. The room was silent for a moment before Tyrion giggled to himself. He shook his head and palmed his forehead in surprise before looking at Cinder. You brought quite the interesting group to our little abode, haven't you? A completely expendable army. I may have underestimated this Orochimaru chap's capabilities. Watt said with genuine praise in his voice. Instilling the idea of death or suicide rather than failure is quite a skill to embed in your soldiers like that. Don't sound too impressed, Arthur. Cinder's voice was low without edge, but with her empty expression sent the shiver down Emerald's spine. As she wondered if they said something that angered her, the pale-skinned lady closed her eyes and sat up in her chair. She snapped her fingers and the doors opened up. My people have nothing but praise to give you for your training. Well, I'm flattered. It's a great honor to be recognized by such an impressive group of people. Orochimaru smiled at the entrance of the room, walking in with Kabuto sadly following at his side. The old serpent fondness had a more advanced, streamlined brace over his injured leg and a glove to cover the missing fingers he lost in the fall. Despite his crippled and lost limbs, the pale man showed tremendous confidence and affable demeanor. Lady Salem, thank you for graciously accepting me and my people into your realm. Not at all. I'm happy to have you join our mission. And how's my favorite patient doing? Kabuto inquired while looking over at Cinder. She and Emerald fumed irritably at the bespectacled doctor. He casually ignored the intent washing over him. Still not able to project your voice properly yet, right? That's understandable considering the trauma you went through. Just take it at your own speed and make sure not to push yourself, okay? Now I take it back. I'm very glad to have these people walking with us. What's left? Make yourself at home. Much appreciated. Orochimaru nodded his head and remained standing at the end of the table before looking at the ruler of the domain. Lady Salem, I feel prudent to ask, but will my followers be safe while walking the grounds of the castle? I don't want any grim attacking them unprovoked, and I'd rather not take any risk if you have a connection to them. I can make a border in which they won't pass us, so your people will be safe. Salem said reassuringly before lacing her fingers together. Do you think your people will be able to acclimate to the new surroundings? This place is quite different from Bell. Oh, I'm sure they'll manage. It might take some time, but they're adaptable. Just give them some time and... A loud crashing from down the hall interrupted the conversation and drew everyone's eyes aside. Kabuto stepped out of the room and looked down the dark hallway before shaking his head. I think the kids are causing a ruckus. Tyrion snickered. Oh, that's not good. That's hardly appropriate behavior when you're visiting a new place. I apologize for the commotion. I'm not sure what's causing it, but no, Orochimaru. Suigetsu's voice echoed off the walls as he rushed down the hallway and slid to a stop in front of the conference hall. Kabuto stepped aside to avoid the sharp boy running into him. We have a problem with controlling. Holy shit! Suigetsu looked around the room in shock, taking in the figures and presence of everyone at the table before his eyes inevitably landed on the woman commanding the room. He stared at her in shock and surprise before Orochimaru snapped his fingers. Suigetsu! Oh, right, sorry. It's Zuko. He's acting up. Then they get him under control. We've tried. Even Kiyomaru is trying to stop him, but... Suigetsu's body exploded in a spray of water as the giant human and grim hybrid barreled through him. The orange-haired, bulking young man with bone spires and splotchy black spots all over his skin stalked into the room with a pounding step. Everyone in the room stared at him in rare hesitation as he growled and panted wildly. There were several footsteps sprinting down the hall to catch up with him, but he found his target. Jugo leapt on the table and lunged across it. Everyone seated immediately reacted, grabbing weapons or taking stances to eliminate the abomination before it could reach its destination. They moved him and stopped when she raised her hand. Jugo! Kiyomaru called out as he slid to a stop with the other Elysian members following behind. Jugo, stop her! Shh! Shh, it's okay, little one. Salem gently whispered and ran her hand softly through the tuft of orange hair on the hybrid's head. Everyone present watched in shock and disbelief as the giant body mixed with green pieces of writhed and whimpered on the table before the pale-faced woman. And Salem's only response was to sweetly palm the raging beast down, like she was calming down a feral animal or pet. She smiled and gently ran her thumb along his cheek. You're confused, aren't you? I'm guessing there are parts of you raging in warring with each other in this place. Did you sense me here, or were you just looking for someone to calm the screaming down? She softly placed her hands beneath his chin and lifted his head before placing her forehead to his. How did you come to be like this? Tears fell down his face. I'm sorry, I can't understand you, but if it makes you feel better, you can stay here for a while longer. Jugo cried and lowered his head as Salem gently eased him down. She then looked up at all the surprised faces watching her before smiling. Well, now that we're all present, I'd like to talk about how we proceed to the next step. Hunting. Oscar looked around and realized it had gotten darker a lot faster than they had anticipated. The sun had just started settling when they were making their way back from the market, and now it was almost nighttime. They weren't much farther. They weren't much farther out from the farm, but the night was so dark and with no moon that the only light was coming from the headlights. Is it getting dark faster? The young farm boy asked, not really as an earnest question, but just as a way to break the silence as the eerie dark night settled over them. It can't be that late, right? Maybe we're just losing track of time. He playfully answered with a smile. This year has gone pretty quickly. Yeah, I guess you're right. Oscar nodded and looked ahead down the road as he let his mind wander. Things had been going by pretty quickly lately. I was hard to believe that Bell fell in the last year, and the whole world was still struggling to pick up the pieces. There hadn't been word from any other kingdoms in months. The CCT was still so badly crippled that barely any calls could be made between settlements, let alone across continents. And in months since this silly little voice in his head started talking, this has cemented itself as probably not just a weird step in the horrible process of puberty, and instead as something possibly much worse. If you're worried about your going crazy, I promise you that isn't the case. Yes, because when the voice in his head said he wasn't crazy, that was a ringing endorsement. Touche. Oscar shuffled around on his seat before asking him, "Hey, how much longer do you think it will be until we get the CCT back up again?" I'm not too sure. We haven't heard anything back from Mistral or any of the other towers since speaking. Honestly, I'm not sure they're even going to focus on getting it back up anytime soon. But it would help a lot of people in the global community. We'll start it back up. Shouldn't that be most important right now? Yes, you're right, Oscar. The most important thing is should be fixing the tower and reconnecting the kingdoms, but that's not what others might think is the most important thing to them right now. His aunt said as she faced the road. To the people in Vale, I'm sure protecting what they have left from the grandma or making sure the people are safe is the most important task for them. And now the other kingdoms are putting their focus on protecting what they can reach. So sometimes people can't help but focus on fixing what's in their reach instead of what's beyond them. She's not wrong. I know that's important, but there has to be a way that helping them can help everyone else, right? Oscar whispered to himself, asking either his aunt or the voice in his head that seemed adamant to be part of his conversations. If there's something wrong, you can't just ignore it and focus on yourself. Nothing can be fixing the world if people aren't willing to extend a hand when they can afford it. Oscar sighed and then looked up, catching his aunt's surprised expression before he murmured, "Oh, what a..." That was surprisingly profound. Oscar, I guess all that reading is paying off, huh? Yeah, that must be it. They continued driving in silence for a few more minutes until... Help me! Oscar and his aunt sat up in shock when they heard the faint, strained sound of a voice calling out for help. The cart came to a slow stop as he stood up from his spot. Did you hear that? Shh! His aunt shushed him and then reached by her wheel. She flipped the switch and the high beams turned on, illuminating more of the darkness and the road ahead of them. And the faint edge of the beam stretching over the road, they could see the figure of someone laid out in the dirt. His aunt called out, "Hello, can you hear me?" "Yes," the voice answered. Oscar now clearly realizing there was a woman. They were a woman and injured. She whimpered, "Yes, I hear you. Please help me." What happened? Grima ambushed us. Me and my friend. Where are your friends? Just me now, please. It hurts. Hold on. Oscar called out and nearly stepped out. He was yanked back into his seat as his aunt stood up and started stepping out. What? Just stay here. She whispered as she stood out of the cart, but didn't take another step away from it. Are they getting closer? When did this happen? How long have you been out here? It hurts. I can't. Please, just answer what you can. I'll help you when you can answer my question. His aunt insisted while refusing to step out any further down the road. But you need to tell me what you can. Oscar shook his head in confusion. Trust her. She's being wary. In times like these, it's smart to at least look out. Something launched out of the shadows and grabbed his aunt. She screamed and thrashed around as she was drawn away from the cart. Hey! Something wrapped around his throat and tried to pull him out as well. His hand immediately lashed out to the dashboard and held him in. While enough pressure squeezed his neck that he thought it would collapse. He felt everything start to go black around him as his air kicked down. Oscar immediately followed the command and kicked his foot back desperately into the grass around his throat weakened, and someone cursed him in response as he gasped for air. Without pause, he immediately reached under his seat and pulled out the shotgun and dick underneath it. Oscar scrambled over the top of the cart and slid down until he dropped into the dirt road. The high brims of the cart nearly blinded him as he stood up, but he ignored the hole in his vision and lifted the shotgun up. He saw several shadows around him and behind the cart, one of them grasping and keeping his aunt in their clutches. These weren't Grim, it was people. Just people. Put that down, kid. He spun back around and aimed the barrel of the shotgun at the woman that had feigned injury to make them stop. Now that she was standing up and in the rays of light, he could see her rough, tattered clothes, similar to that of a bandit. Oh God, they were bandits. She raised her hands towards his shotgun while another large figure followed behind her. You might end up hurting yourself if you fire that thing, and none of us want that, do you? Please, don't hurt him. We're not going to hurt anyone, she calmly said while looking down at Oscar. He could barely register anything she said as fear and panic invaded every sense in his body. He was so scared that the shotgun was shaking violently in his grip. As long as your kid doesn't shoot me or do anything stupid, right, kid? He was wielding a weapon he never used before. His aunt was captured and he was faced with five bandits surrounding him and the cart. He needed to do something. He had to do something, but he just couldn't stop shaking. We just want some supplies from your cart, the bandit leader said softly, almost confidently as she grabbed the front of the shotgun and slowly lowered it down to the ground. You can spare that much, can't you, kid? He had to do something, but he was shaking in fear. Please. So they slammed on top of the cart hard enough to shake it and made Oscar and the bandits look back. A figure had landed on top of the cart, but Oscar couldn't get a good look of them in the beams of the light. All he saw was a shadow immediately shrink down to along the top of the cart and spin around. Suddenly the three other shadows surrounding the cart were knocked back and his aunt was suddenly freed. The female bandit grabbed Oscar's neck and tossed him aside as she pulled his shotgun out of his hands. Suddenly the deafening sound of the gunfire blew up a box of something on the back of the cart. As the shadow dodged the shot, Oscar scrambled over the ground before someone grabbed him and pulled him in. It was only after he was hugging to their embrace that he realized it was his aunt. They stayed huddled on the ground as the pandemonium descended. It was too dark for Oscar to discern who was who, but one shadow was moving with incredible speed to disarm and immobilize the other shadows. The bandit leader kept firing the shotgun to try and catch this speedy shadow off guard, but it kept avoiding the path of the bullets and taking out the other bandits along the way. When the three surrounding the cart were taken care of, the shadow vaulted over the cart entirely and reached out for the leader holding the shotgun. There was a flash of orange as something grabbed the gun before she could fire and yanked it away. So something glinted in the light of the high beams and flashed down as the shotgun was sliced into two pieces. What followed was a display of speed and skill Oscar honestly believed he would only see in movies or on TV. The savior shadow moved with such grace and dexterity he couldn't believe it. First they knocked the leader aside before striking her large bodyguard under the knee to topple him over. He followed up with a kick and knocked the leader over, and a fast strike that knocked the large man out completely. Before the bandit leader could scream and retaliate, the shadow raised his weapon and stopped it just under her neck. The man keeping her back whispered, "You should take your people and leave. Now, please, we ran out of supplies," the bandit said. "We just need something to get us by. We weren't going to hurt them. You know your sob stories would work a lot better if I couldn't look at all of you and know your line. I could see what you would have done. Now save your breath and move." He slammed his weapon on top of the cart and started everyone, "Move!" The bandit leader snarled and pulled her larger member up on her back. She and her people quickly made their way down the path Oscar had just come from and away from their farm. As they left, Oscar slowly stood out of his aunt's grasp and stepped forward. He walked to the front of the cart and stared at the man that had saved him. The man, illuminated in the lights of the cart, turned and looked back at him. He looked older than Oscar, but younger than a full adult. The scratches on his face almost looked like whiskers, and the large ears flickered in his blonde hair. The young man was dressed in a black outfit with orange highlights along his shoulder, and as Oscar stared at him longer, he felt a growing sense of unease at what might happen next. The man's arms lunged up, and Oscar thought he was about to attack, but was instead just sheathing his weapon. They stood across from each other in silence for several seconds until he heard the voice speaking. "You should talk to him." "Yes, thank you." The blonde faunus just watched him silently before slightly nodding. "You're welcome." He turned and started to walk around the car. "Don't let him leave." "Oh, why? He can't leave yet." "Oh, wait." Oscar called out so sporadically at the voice's request and stopped the blonde in his tracks. I want to." "It's fine," the whiskered man said as he kept walking. "But where are you going now?" His aunt stood up and asked the man that had saved her life. "Either out into the forest or somewhere with lodging. We have a farm not too far from here." His aunt offered to the stranger. "It's the least we can do after what you've done for us tonight." The blond man sighed him. "Really, you don't have to. Please, let us repay you for what you did. Please." After a moment of quiet, the blond man stepped back along the cart and into the light where they could see him. He gave a small nod, and Oscar smiled in delight as their savior took up the offer. "Do you want to sit in the cart? Because there might be some room in the back, or you can have mine. I'll walk." "Okay." Oscar nodded and quickly took his seat back in the front, slipping by the blond man and sliding back into his spot. He and the blonde faunus shared a look before he spoke. "My name is Oscar, by the way." "I'm Naruto." Oscar held out his hand. "It's nice to meet you, Naruto." The whisker man looked at his offered hand and then took it in his. "You too, Oscar." End of chapter 85.